My parents said I was a failure. A year later, I controlled their business. I still remember the exact moment everything shattered. It was a Tuesday evening in October, and the autumn rain was hammering against the windows of my parents' house in suburban Chicago. I was 24 years old, sitting at their dining room table, trying to explain my business idea one more time. My father didn't even look up from his phone. My mother just sighed, that particular sigh she'd perfected over the years, the one that said I was wasting her time again. They owned a mid-sized commercial cleaning company, nothing fancy, but it paid the bills and then some. For 30 years, they'd built it from the ground up, servicing office buildings and corporate spaces across the northern suburbs. They were proud of what they'd accomplished, and they never let me forget it. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, became another opportunity to remind me of their success and my apparent lack thereof. I had graduated from Northwestern with a degree in business administration 2 years earlier. Not from community college, not from some online program, but Northwestern. I'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for it, maintained a 3.7 GPA, and graduated with honors. But none of that mattered to them. In their eyes, I was still the daughter who couldn't do anything right, who dreamed too big, who didn't understand how the real world worked. That Tuesday night, I was trying to pitch them on a simple idea. I'd noticed a gap in the market, something they were too set in their ways to see. The commercial cleaning industry was changing. Companies were looking for eco-friendly solutions, sustainable practices, green certifications. I'd done the research, spent months analyzing market trends, talking to facility managers, understanding what corporate clients actually wanted. I had spreadsheets, projections, a full business plan. I wasn't asking them for money. I was asking them to evolve their own company, to let me help them capture a new market segment that was growing by double digits every year. My father finally looked up. His face was red, that angry flush that crept up his neck when he was about to explode. He told me I didn't know what I was talking about. He said I was naive, that I'd never worked a real day in my life, that my degree didn't mean anything in the actual business world. My mother nodded along, adding that I needed to stop dreaming and start being realistic. They said I should be grateful they even let me live at home rent-free while I figured out what I was going to do with my life. The words that came next are burned into my memory. My father stood up, pointed at the door, and told me I was a failure. Not that I might fail, not that I was failing, but that I was a failure. Present tense. Permanent condition. He said I would never amount to anything, that I didn't have what it took to make it in business, that I should probably just find some administrative job somewhere and stop embarrassing them with my ridiculous ideas. Something broke inside me that night. Not my spirit, not my determination, but something else. The last thread of need for their approval, maybe. The desperate hope that they might one day see me as capable, as worthy, as someone with value. It snapped clean through, and in its place something harder settled in. Something cold and focused. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just gathered my papers, put them back in my folder, and walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom. The room still had posters from high school, a shelf of participation trophies that my mother loved to point out whenever she wanted to remind me I'd never won anything that really mattered. I sat on my bed, opened my laptop, and started making plans. I had $7,000 in my savings account. Not much, but it was something. I'd been working part-time at a consulting firm downtown, doing market analysis and data research. The pay wasn't great, but I'd been saving every penny I could, living at home specifically to build up capital. I'd originally planned to save for another year, maybe 2, before making my move. But that night, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. The next morning, I gave my notice at my parents' house. Not dramatically, not with some grand speech. I just told them at breakfast that I'd be moving out by the end of the month. My mother seemed relieved. My father grunted something about it being about time I learned to stand on my own feet. Neither of them asked where I was going or what my plans were. They didn't care. I found a studio apartment in Logan Square, one of those basement units that smelled faintly of mildew but was cheap enough that I could afford it and still have money left to invest in my business. The landlord was a Polish man in his 60s who'd owned the building for decades. He didn't ask many questions when I paid the deposit and first month's rent in cash. The apartment had a tiny bathroom, a kitchenette that was really just a hot plate and a mini fridge, and a main room that barely fit a bed and a desk. The single window looked out onto the sidewalk, and I could see people's shoes walking past all day long. It was perfect. I spent the first week setting everything up. I registered my LLC, opened a business bank account, designed a simple website. I called my company EcoShield Commercial Solutions. The name tested well in the small focus groups I'd conducted, and it clearly communicated what we were about. I wasn't trying to compete with my parents directly, at least not at first. I was going after the market they were ignoring, the companies that wanted green cleaning solutions and were willing to pay premium prices for them. My strategy was simple. I'd start small, target boutique office spaces and startup companies in neighborhoods like River North and the West Loop. These were businesses that cared about their image, that wanted to be seen as environmentally conscious, that would pay extra for eco-friendly cleaning products and sustainable practices. I'd undercut the big corporate cleaning companies on price while offering something my parents' traditional company couldn't match. A genuine commitment to environmental responsibility backed by actual certifications and transparent practices. I had no employees, no equipment, nothing. Just a website, a phone number, and the willingness to do whatever it took. I spent my days cold calling property managers and facility directors. Most hung up on me. Some were polite but not interested. But just a few were willing to listen. My first client was a small tech startup in Wicker Park. They had one floor in a converted warehouse, maybe 3,000 square feet. The founder was a guy in his early 30s who'd made money in cryptocurrency and was trying to build something legitimate. He cared about sustainability, or at least he cared about being seen as someone who cared about sustainability. He wanted to be able to tell investors and potential hires that every aspect of his company was green, including the cleaning service. I quoted him a price that was barely above cost, but I threw in extras that bigger companies wouldn't bother with. Monthly sustainability reports, carbon offset calculations, guaranteed use of EPA-certified green products. I showed him exactly how much waste we'd divert from landfills, how much water we'd save, how much we'd reduce his company's overall environmental footprint. He signed a 6-month contract on the spot. That first night I cleaned that office myself. Every square foot of it. I'd bought commercial-grade eco-friendly supplies with my own money, watched hours of YouTube videos on proper cleaning techniques, read industry manuals until my eyes hurt. I worked from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, making sure every surface gleamed, every corner was spotless. My back ached. My hands were raw from the cleaning solutions despite the gloves. But when I locked up and walked out into the early morning cold, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. The next 6 months were a blur of 18-hour days and constant hustle. I learned quickly that running a cleaning business wasn't about grand strategy or business school theories. It was about showing up, doing the work, and proving yourself one client at a time. Every morning, I'd wake up in that basement apartment, make instant coffee on my hot plate, and check my email before the sun came up. Every night, I'd fall asleep with my laptop still open, reviewing the next day's schedule or researching potential clients. Word spread faster than I expected. That tech startup founder apparently knew everyone in the Chicago startup scene, and he loved telling people about his eco-friendly cleaning service. Within 3 months, I had 5 clients. Within 6 months, I had 12. Small offices mostly, but they were steady income and they all signed contracts. I was still doing most of the cleaning myself, working from 10 at night until dawn, then spending my days on sales calls and administrative work. The money was tighter than I'd ever experienced. Some weeks, I had to choose between buying groceries or replacing worn-out equipment. I ate a lot of ramen and peanut butter sandwiches that winter. The studio apartment was freezing because I kept the heat as low as I could stand it to save money. I wore 2 sweaters indoors and slept under every blanket I owned. But every dollar I saved went back into the business. New equipment, better marketing materials, professional certifications that would make us more credible. By spring, I hired my first employee. Her name was Maria, a woman in her 40s who'd been working for a large cleaning company and hated it. They treated her like a number, paid minimum wage, provided cheap supplies that hurt her hands, and didn't care about the quality of her work. I offered her $12 an hour, which was all I could afford, but I also offered her respect, good equipment, and a share of any tips clients gave us. She took the job and became the backbone of my operation. Maria knew things I'd never learned in business school. She taught me which products actually worked and which were just expensive marketing. She showed me techniques that cut our cleaning time in half without sacrificing quality. She had a network of other cleaners, people she'd worked with over the years, and when we needed extra hands for bigger jobs, she knew exactly who to call. Within a month of hiring her, our efficiency doubled. I used that efficiency to expand. I started targeting medium-sized companies, the kind that had entire floors in office buildings downtown. These weren't startups run by idealistic founders anymore. These were established businesses with procurement departments and competitive bidding processes. Getting in the door was harder, but the contracts were bigger and more stable. My breakthrough came from an unexpected place. One of my small clients was acquired by a larger company, a consulting firm with offices in the Loop. The startup's founder recommended us to his new bosses, and they agreed to a trial period for 1 floor of their building. If we performed well, they'd consider expanding the contract to cover all 7 floors. I knew this was my chance. I assigned Maria to personally oversee that floor every single night. I checked in at 2 in the morning to make sure everything was perfect. I left detailed checklists and quality control reports for the facility manager every morning. After the first month, they expanded us to 3 floors. After the second month, all 7. That one contract tripled my revenue overnight. With steady cash flow finally coming in, I made a decision that terrified me. I took out a small business loan, $25,000 from a community bank that specialized in lending to women-owned businesses. The interest rate wasn't great, but it was manageable. I used that money to hire 3 more employees, buy a used van for equipment transport, and rent a small storage unit to keep our supplies organized. I also invested in technology. I built a custom scheduling and routing system that optimized our cleaners' time and reduced travel between jobs. I implemented a quality control app that let clients report issues instantly and track our response times. These weren't expensive solutions. I cobbled them together using affordable software and learned basic coding from online tutorials, but they made us look more professional than companies 10 times our size. By summer, EcoShield had 23 regular clients and 7 employees. We were servicing over 100,000 square feet of office space every week. I'd moved out of the basement apartment and into a 1-bedroom place on the 2nd floor of a building in Pilsen. It had real windows, a full kitchen, and I didn't have to watch people's shoes walk by anymore. I still wasn't paying myself much. Most of the profit went back into growth, but I was surviving. More than surviving, actually. I was building something real. I hadn't spoken to my parents since I moved out. They hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't reached out at all. I'd driven past their house a few times, usually late at night when I was coming back from jobs on the north side. The lights were always on in the living room, and I could picture them sitting there, my father watching television, my mother reading her tablet, both of them content in their routine. Part of me wanted to call them, to tell them what I was building, to show them I wasn't a failure. But I never did. Their words still echoed too clearly in my mind. Then, in early August, something unexpected happened. I got a call from a commercial real estate broker I'd been cultivating for months. He managed properties all over the Chicago area, and I'd been trying to get on his preferred vendor list since I started the company. He told me he had a situation. One of his biggest properties, a 6-story office building in Schaumburg, had just fired their cleaning company. The previous vendor had been cutting corners, using unauthorized subcontractors, and the building's tenants were complaining. He needed a replacement immediately, someone who could start within a week and handle a building that size. The contract was worth more than all my other clients combined, but it came with a catch. The building was in the northwest suburbs, the same area where my parents operated. The same area where their company had dominated for 3 decades. I'd been deliberately avoiding that territory, not out of fear exactly, but because I wasn't ready for that confrontation. I knew that if I started working in their backyard, word would eventually get back to them. I took the contract anyway. We started servicing that building the following Monday. It was our biggest challenge yet. 6 floors, multiple tenants, demanding schedules, high expectations. I brought in temporary help, worked alongside my team every night for the first 2 weeks to make sure we nailed it. We did. Within a month, the property manager told me it was the best cleaning service they'd had in years. Within 2 months, the broker added us to his preferred vendor list. Within 3 months, he was recommending us for other properties he managed. That's when I started appearing on my parents' radar, though I didn't know it yet. In their world, in the small ecosystem of commercial cleaning in the Chicago suburbs, a new company doesn't just appear and start taking significant contracts. People talk. Vendors gossip. Competitors notice. The game was changing and I was just getting started. I first heard that my parents knew about me in October, almost exactly 1 year after that terrible Tuesday night at their dining room table. One of my employees, a guy named David who'd recently joined us, mentioned in passing that he used to work for a company called Brennan Commercial Cleaning. That was my parents' company. My last name was Brennan. I'd legally changed my business to use my middle name, Clark, specifically to avoid immediate association, but the connection was inevitable in such a small industry. David told me his former boss, my father, had been asking questions about EcoShield. Who owned it, where they came from, how they were undercutting prices while still maintaining quality. My father apparently thought we were using illegal labor or cutting corners on insurance. He couldn't comprehend that a new company could be competitive without cheating somehow. That was typical of his thinking. He'd built his success on being the cheapest option, on squeezing every penny, on doing things the way they'd always been done. The idea that someone might innovate, might find efficiencies he'd never considered, didn't compute. I knew the confrontation was coming. I just didn't expect it to happen the way it did. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October. I was at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, meeting with a potential client, when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but it had a local area code, so I answered. It was my mother. Her voice was cold, formal, the tone she used when she was truly angry but trying to maintain composure. She told me we needed to talk, that I needed to come to their house that evening. Not a request, a demand. I almost said no. Almost told her I was busy, that I had a business to run, that I didn't have time for whatever lecture she wanted to deliver. But something stopped me. Maybe curiosity, maybe the desire to finally show them what I'd built, maybe just the need to face them on my own terms this time. I told her I'd be there at 7. Their house looked exactly the same. The same manicured lawn, the same decorative lamp in the front window, the same burgundy front door. I sat in my car for a few minutes before going in, watching the house, remembering all the times I'd walked through that door feeling small and inadequate. This time felt different. This time I had something they didn't know about, something I'd built without them, something they couldn't take credit for or diminish. My father answered the door. He looked older than I remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. He didn't hug me, didn't even really greet me. Just stepped aside and gestured toward the dining room. The same dining room where he'd called me a failure a year ago. They'd prepared for this meeting. I could tell immediately. There were papers spread across the table, printouts of my website, client testimonials, even copies of contracts I'd signed. Someone had done research, thorough research. My mother sat at the head of the table, her reading glasses on, her expression unreadable. My father started talking before I even sat down. He told me he knew everything, that he'd had people looking into my company for months. He knew my client list, my pricing structure, my employee count. He knew about the loan I'd taken out, about the storage unit, about the used van. He recited facts about my business like he was reading from a dossier, which he probably was. Then he got to his point. He was disappointed in me. Not proud, not impressed, disappointed. He said I was operating in his territory, stealing his potential clients, undercutting his prices with unsustainable business practices. He called my eco-friendly approach a gimmick, a marketing ploy that would fall apart once clients realized they were paying more for the same service. He said I was making enemies in the industry, that people were talking about how Brennan's daughter had turned against her own family. My mother added her thoughts. She said I was being selfish, that I'd abandoned them, that I'd started a competing business out of spite. She brought up everything, every family dinner I'd missed, every holiday I'd spent working instead of visiting them, every way I'd apparently failed as a daughter. She made it all about loyalty and family obligation, conveniently forgetting that they were the ones who'd called me a failure and pushed me away. I let them talk. I sat there calm and quiet, letting them get it all out. When they finally stopped, when they'd exhausted their list of grievances and accusations, I spoke. I told them the truth, simply and directly. I reminded them of that night a year ago, of the exact words my father had used, of how they'd dismissed my ideas and told me I'd never amount to anything. I told them I'd built EcoShield from nothing, with no help from them, no connections, no family money. I'd done it through hard work, smart strategy, and genuine innovation, all the things they claimed to value but apparently only respected when they did it themselves. Then I told them about my numbers. Real numbers. Revenue, profit margins, growth rates, client retention. I'd brought my laptop and I showed them spreadsheets, financial projections, market analysis. I walked them through exactly how I'd built a profitable company in 12 months, how I'd identified and captured a market segment they'd completely ignored, how I'd created efficiencies that let me offer better service at competitive prices without cutting corners. My father's face got redder with every slide. My mother stayed silent, but I could see her recalculating, reassessing. They'd expected me to be defensive, maybe even apologetic. They hadn't expected confidence backed by hard data. Then I made them an offer, one I'd been considering for weeks but hadn't fully committed to until that moment. I told them their business was stagnating. I'd done my research too. Their revenue had been flat for 5 years. They were losing contracts to newer companies, struggling to compete with larger national chains, watching their market share slowly erode. They were making money, sure, but they weren't growing. They were slowly dying without realizing it. I proposed a merger. Not an acquisition, not a takeover, a genuine partnership. They had infrastructure, established relationships, decades of reputation. I had innovation, growth trajectory, access to markets they couldn't reach. Together, we could dominate the Chicago commercial cleaning market. We could combine their traditional client base with my eco-friendly offerings, create a comprehensive service that appealed to everyone from old-school manufacturers to cutting-edge tech companies. My father laughed. Actually laughed. He said I was delusional if I thought he'd ever partner with someone who had 1 year of experience and delusions of grandeur. He said I'd be bankrupt within 2 years, that my little niche market would dry up, that I'd come crawling back begging for a job when it all fell apart. I stood up, closed my laptop, and told them I'd given them a chance. I said the offer stood for 30 days, after which I'd continue building my company and competing with theirs. I told them to think about it, really think about it, and call me if they changed their minds. I walked out of that house knowing they wouldn't call. Their pride wouldn't let them. Their need to be right, to see me fail, to prove that their way was the only way, it was too strong. That was fine. I had other plans. The real war started 3 days after that meeting. My parents launched what they probably thought was a devastating counterattack. They started calling my clients, offering to undercut my prices by 20%. They spread rumors through their network that I was inexperienced, unreliable, that my eco-friendly products didn't actually work. They contacted my vendors trying to get them to stop supplying me with materials. It was petty, desperate, and exactly what I'd expected. I didn't panic. I'd prepared for this. Every contract I signed had strong terms, penalty clauses for early termination, performance guarantees that made switching providers expensive and risky. My clients weren't just buying cleaning services from me, they were buying into a relationship, a commitment to sustainability that looked good in their annual reports and marketing materials. Most of them ignored my parents' offers entirely, but 2 clients did switch. A small startup and a medium-sized office building, both lured away by promises of lower prices and my parents' 3 decades of experience. It stung not because of the lost revenue, though that hurt, but because it felt personal. They were trying to destroy what I'd built, not compete with it, destroy it. I responded by doubling down on growth. I took out another loan, a bigger one this time, and used it to hire 10 more employees and expand into new territories. I started targeting clients in the western suburbs, areas my parents had never bothered with because they seemed too far from their base of operations. I won contracts they didn't even know existed. By December, something interesting started happening. Employees from my parents' company began reaching out to me. They'd heard about EcoShield, about how we treated our workers, about the better equipment and higher pay. They were tired of my father's management style, his constant criticism, his refusal to invest in anything that didn't immediately boost profit margins. 5 of their best cleaners quit and came to work for me within a single month. My father was furious. I heard through the industry grapevine that he was telling people I was poaching his employees, that I was engaging in unfair business practices. But there was nothing unfair about it. I was offering better working conditions and better pay, and people were choosing to work for me. That's called capitalism, the same system he'd preached to me my entire life. Then came January and everything changed. The commercial real estate broker who'd given me my first big suburban contract called with news. One of the largest office parks in the northwest suburbs was putting out an RFP for cleaning services. It was a massive contract, 20 buildings, over 1 million square feet of space. The current provider was my parents' company. They'd held that contract for 15 years, and it was their single biggest source of revenue. The property management company had decided to rebid it because of complaints about service quality and lack of innovation. I knew that if I won that contract, it would cripple my parents' business. They'd lose at least 40% of their revenue overnight. They'd have to lay off employees, sell equipment, maybe even shut down entirely. It would be the end of everything they'd built. I submitted a proposal anyway. I spent 2 weeks on that bid. I put together the most comprehensive proposal I'd ever created, combining traditional cleaning services with advanced eco-friendly options, technology integration, quality control systems, employee training programs, everything I'd learned and developed over the past year. I priced it competitively but not unreasonably. I wasn't trying to buy the contract with an unsustainable low bid. I was trying to win it by being genuinely better. The property management company invited 3 finalists to present in person. Me, my parents, and a large national chain. The presentation was scheduled for mid-February, in a conference room at their main office in Schaumburg. I arrived early, wearing a navy suit I'd bought specifically for this meeting. I'd printed color copies of my proposal, prepared a slide deck, rehearsed my talking points until I could deliver them in my sleep. I was ready. My parents arrived 15 minutes later. We saw each other in the lobby. My mother looked startled, like she hadn't actually believed I'd be there. My father's face went through several expressions: shock, anger, something that might have been respect, then settled back into that familiar hardness. We didn't speak. We just stood on opposite sides of the lobby waiting to be called in. The presentation lasted an hour. I went last, which gave me the advantage of knowing what I was up against. My parents stuck to their standard pitch, emphasizing their decades of experience and local knowledge. The national chain focused on their size and resources. I focused on results, innovation, and the future of commercial cleaning services. I showed them data. Client satisfaction scores, retention rates, environmental impact reports, employee turnover statistics. I demonstrated our technology platform, showed them how we used routing optimization to reduce costs and improve efficiency, how our quality control app had reduced complaint response times by 80%. I walked them through case studies, specific examples of how we'd solved problems and exceeded expectations. And then I made them an offer they couldn't refuse. I proposed a 6-month trial period at a reduced rate, with performance guarantees that would penalize me financially if we didn't meet specific metrics. I was putting my money where my mouth was, taking on all the risk to prove I could deliver. They told us they'd make a decision within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I kept working, kept managing my existing clients, kept expanding into new markets. But in the back of my mind, I was constantly thinking about that contract, about what it would mean, about what would happen to my parents if I won. The call came on a Friday afternoon. The property management company offered me the contract. All 20 buildings starting in 30 days. It was the biggest win of my career, the validation of everything I'd worked for, the proof that I wasn't a failure. It was also the end of my parents' business as they knew it. I accepted the contract immediately, then spent the next week preparing for the massive scaling up we'd need to do. I hired 20 new employees, leased a second van, rented a proper office space instead of working from my apartment. I was building something real now, something substantial, something that would last. My father called me 3 weeks later. His voice was different, smaller somehow. He told me they were in trouble, that losing the contract had devastated their cash flow, that they were going to have to make significant cuts just to stay afloat. He didn't apologize for what he'd said to me, didn't acknowledge that he'd been wrong. But he asked, in a roundabout way, if my merger offer was still on the table. I told him it wasn't. That offer had been about partnership, about combining strengths, about building something together. That ship had sailed when they'd chosen to try to destroy me instead of work with me. But I made him a different offer. I offered to buy their company outright. Not at market value, at distressed value. They'd take a loss, a significant one, but they'd get enough to pay off their debts and retire comfortably. Their employees would keep their jobs, absorbed into EcoShield. Their clients would transition smoothly to our management. The Brennan name would disappear, but the work they'd done would continue under new leadership. My leadership. He asked for time to think about it, to discuss it with my mother. I gave him 48 hours. They accepted. The paperwork took 6 weeks to finalize, lawyers and accountants reviewing every detail. On March 23rd, exactly 18 months after my father had called me a failure, I signed the documents that made me the owner of their company. I combined it with EcoShield, absorbed their contracts and employees, and created the largest independent commercial cleaning company in the Chicago metropolitan area. My parents attended the closing. We sat across a conference table in a lawyer's office, signing papers, transferring ownership, ending one chapter and beginning another. My mother cried quietly. My father stared at the documents like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. When it was done, when all the signatures were in place and the wire transfers had been initiated, my father finally looked at me directly. He told me in a voice barely above a whisper that he'd been wrong about me. That I'd proven him wrong about everything. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was the closest he'd ever come to admitting a mistake. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw his words back in his face. I just nodded and told him I hoped they'd enjoy their retirement. I walked out of that office into a bright spring afternoon. The air was warm, the first real warmth after a brutal Chicago winter. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the sun on my face, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. All the 18-hour days, the ramen dinners, the cold apartment, the constant doubt and fear and determination. I thought about that Tuesday night, about sitting at their dining room table, about the moment everything shattered. I thought about how much had changed, how much I'd changed. I pulled out my phone and called Maria. I told her we needed to have a company meeting, that there was big news to share, that EcoShield had just gotten a lot bigger. She laughed and said she'd round up the team. As I walked to my car, I realized something. I'd spent so much energy trying to prove my parents wrong, trying to show them I wasn't a failure, trying to earn their respect. But somewhere along the way that had stopped mattering. I'd built something real, something valuable, not for them but for me. Not to prove them wrong but to prove myself right. The business was mine now. All of it. The success, the responsibility, the future. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exactly what I'd worked for. I started the car and headed back to the office. There was work to do, always more work to do. Integration plans to finalize, employees to reassure, clients to manage, growth to plan. The story wasn't over. In many ways it was just beginning. But I'd already won the part that mattered. I'd won the fight against doubt, against limitation, against people who'd tried to define what I could and couldn't be. I'd proven that failure is just an opinion and opinions can be wrong. And I had the last laugh after all.